I want to tell you a story I have carried inside me for years. It is not loud or dramatic. It does not begin with shouting or accidents or sudden disasters. It begins quietly, the same way most regrets do. It begins with a small ache, the kind that lives in your chest for so long that you almost forget it is there. And then one day something happens, and that ache wakes up again, like it had been waiting for the right moment to remind you of everything you lost, everything you missed, and everything you still wish you had. For most of my life, I was the kind of man who stood near the edges of my own family. Not because I wanted to, and not because anyone pushed me there. I think I stepped back on my own, long before I understood the cost of doing that. My childhood home was warm and noisy, filled with the kind of holiday memories people talk about in movies or greeting cards. But somewhere along the way, after I grew up and the years started moving faster, I drifted. Maybe I got too busy. Maybe I got stubborn. Maybe I got tired of feeling like the one who never fully fit in. I told myself I was fine, that I liked the quiet, that I preferred keeping to myself. And maybe that was true. But loneliness has a way of convincing you that it is a choice, even when it isn't. For almost 15 years, I watched my family celebrate holidays without me. Not because they banned me, not because they didn't love me, but because we all fell into a strange pattern. They stopped asking me to come, and I stopped asking if I could. At first, the invites were easy to refuse. I always had a reason. Work was busy. Travel was too expensive. I was sick. I was tired. I needed rest. And every time I said no, it became easier to say it again the next year. Eventually, the calls stopped. The texts slowed. The group photos continued without me. I became a name they remembered, instead of a face they saw. I never told anyone how much it hurt. When Christmas came around, I pretended it was just another day. I'd make coffee, sit by the window, and scroll through pictures of families decorating trees, sharing meals, exchanging gifts. I'd tell myself I didn't want that life. I'd tell myself it was peaceful to spend the day alone. And for a while it was. But over time, that peace felt more like silence. And that silence felt heavier every year. People think loneliness is something that happens suddenly, like a door slamming shut. But for me, it happened slowly. A missed dinner, a skipped birthday, a late reply, a trip I said I couldn't make. Eventually, I woke up one day and realized I didn't know my own nieces and nephews. I didn't know what careers my siblings had settled into. I didn't know the rhythm of their lives anymore. And they didn't know mine either. Still, even with the distance growing, I thought I had more time. I thought one day I would reach out and say, "Hey, maybe I can come this year." I thought they would cheer and say, "We missed you. We'd love to have you." But every year I waited, the words felt heavier, like I was trying to lift something I didn't have the strength for. The truth is, pride kept me away just as much as distance did. I didn't want to show up after so many years like a stranger knocking on a familiar door. I didn't want to face the questions, the looks, the awkward silence that comes when people don't know what to say to you anymore. So I stayed away. Not because I wanted to, but because I had gone too long pretending I didn't care. But everything changed on one Christmas morning. A morning I never expected. A morning that reached into my life and pulled open a door I thought was sealed forever. But before I tell you about that day, I have to take you back a bit. Back to the beginning of how all this started. Because stories like this don't begin with one event. They begin with the small things, the tiny moments you don't notice until you look back and realize they were pointing you somewhere all along. My story really began years before that Christmas, when I was 27 and trying to figure out what kind of man I wanted to be. I had just started a new job. I lived alone in a small apartment, and I felt both excited and anxious about the future. My siblings were already building families of their own. My parents were getting older. Life was moving, as it always does, and I was trying to keep up. That year, my family planned a big holiday gathering. Everyone was going to be there. My brothers, my sisters, their kids, cousins I hadn't seen in a long time, and my parents, who loved having all their children under one roof. They asked me to come. They asked weeks in advance. They rearranged the schedule so I wouldn't have to take extra time off work. They tried so hard to make it easy, and I still said no. I told them I was swamped at work. I told them I couldn't get away. But the truth was, I felt like I didn't belong. Everyone seemed so connected, so busy with their own lives, so comfortable in their roles as parents, spouses, hosts. I didn't know where I fit in that picture. I didn't want to be the extra chair at the table, the odd one out. When the day finally came, They called me on video chat. Everyone smiled and shouted my name. Kids ran around in the background. Someone joked that they saved me a plate. Someone else held up their glass. I laughed. I waved. I said I was fine. And when the call ended, something quiet in me sank deeper. That was the first Christmas I spent alone. I didn't know it would become a pattern. I didn't know that for the next decade, I would watch holidays happen from a distance, as if I were seeing my own life through a window I couldn't step through. The next few years passed in a blur of work and routine. I was good at keeping myself busy. I told myself that was enough. But sometimes, on cold nights, I would catch myself thinking about things I didn't want to think about. About my mother's cooking. About my father laughing until he lost his breath. About the way my siblings used to argue about who would sit where or who would clean the dishes. About little moments that didn't seem important at the time, but somehow became precious when they were gone. I think the hardest part wasn't missing the events. It was realizing how easily people can drift apart without meaning to. You don't wake up one day and decide you don't need your family. It happens in small steps. A missed call, a canceled plan, a birthday message sent late. And suddenly you are living a life that feels separate from the people who once shaped you. But the story I want to tell you is not about distance. It's about what happens when life forces you to see what really matters. When it gives you a moment, a single unexpected moment, that changes everything. That moment began on a Christmas morning unlike any other. But before I tell you about it, I have to explain what happened the night before. Because sometimes the biggest turning points come right after the moments when we feel the most alone. It was Christmas Eve. I was 42, and for the first time, the loneliness felt heavier than usual. Not because anything bad had happened, not because someone hurt me, but because I realized I couldn't keep pretending the distance didn't matter. I sat alone in my apartment, watching the lights from a neighbor's window flicker through the curtains. It was quiet, too quiet. I made myself a simple dinner. I tried watching a movie. I tried reading. I tried anything that would distract me from the hollow ache inside me. Nothing worked. Around midnight, I found myself looking through old messages. Birthday wishes. Missed calls. Photos I never responded to. Invitations I ignored with short excuses. I felt something I had not allowed myself to feel for years. Regret, heavy and honest. And I wondered, for the first time in a long time, if they still thought about me. If they still wanted me around. If I still had a place in their world. Or if I had stayed away for so long that my chair at the table was gone for good. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about the years I had let slip by, the connections I had not kept, the kids who had grown up without knowing their uncle, the holidays I had missed, the laughter I had not heard, the stories I had not been part of. I didn't know it then, but something was already on its way to me. Something that would break the silence of all those years. Something that would arrive on my doorstep before sunrise. And that is where the Rayal story begins. That Christmas morning started differently from every other one I had ever lived through. Not in a dramatic way. Not with some sudden shock. It began quietly, almost timidly, as if the day itself was unsure whether it should wake me. It was still dark outside. The kind of deep, early darkness that makes you feel like the world hasn't taken its first breath yet. I remember looking at the clock beside my bed and seeing it wasn't even 5 in the morning. I hadn't slept well. My thoughts had kept me awake most of the night, drifting in and out like soft waves that never fully let you rest. When I finally sat up, the room felt colder than usual, the kind of cold that finds its way under your skin when you've been thinking too much. My apartment was silent, except for the soft hum of the heater that struggled to warm the rooms on winter nights. I rubbed my hands together, trying to shake off the stiffness of the night before, but the heaviness in my chest stayed right where it was. I didn't have any plans that day. Christmas had become a day I tried to ignore, even though it always found a way to remind me it was there. I walked to the kitchen and made myself coffee. The warm scent rose in the air, filling the quiet space with something familiar. I wrapped my hands around the mug and leaned against the counter, staring out the window. It was still dark, but the sky had a faint outline of light near the horizon. Snow had fallen the night before, covering the rooftops and sidewalks in a soft white blanket. There's something about snow that makes the world feel gentler, even when your heart isn't. It muffles sound. It slows everything down. It makes you think about things you usually avoid thinking about. I stood there for a long time, watching the sky slowly open up to the morning. I didn't expect anything from that day. I didn't expect anyone to call. I didn't expect anyone to knock on my door. I didn't expect anything other than the same quiet holiday I had grown used to. But sometimes life gives you something before you even know how to receive it. I heard the knock around 5:30 a.m. It was soft at first, almost cautious. I wasn't even sure it was someone at my door. I thought maybe I imagined it, like when your mind is still drifting between dreams and reality. Then it came again, louder this time, firm enough to pull me out of my thoughts. I set my mug down and walked slowly to the door, confused. No one ever came to my apartment at that hour. And on Christmas morning? It didn't make sense. When I reached the door, I paused for a moment with my hand on the handle. I took a breath before unlocking it and pulling it open. At first, I didn't see anything. The hallway was dim, lit only by a small bulb that flickered sometimes. But then I looked down, and there it was. A small box, wrapped in simple paper, placed gently right at my doorstep. No one was in the hallway. No footsteps. No elevator sound. Nothing. Just the box, sitting there like it had been waiting for me. I stared at it for a long moment, unsure what to do. It's strange how something so small can feel so heavy when you don't expect it. It wasn't the size of the box that mattered. It was the question behind it. Who left it? Why? And why today of all days? I bent down and picked it up. It wasn't heavy. Just a simple package tied with a piece of thin red ribbon. I turned it over in my hands, looking for a name or a card, but there was nothing. Just plain wrapping paper and that ribbon that looked like someone tied it by hand. I closed the door and carried it inside. My apartment felt different now, like the presence of that small, unexpected thing changed the atmosphere. I set it gently on the table and just stood there looking at it. Part of me didn't want to open it right away. It felt like opening it would make the moment too real. And another part of me was afraid it wasn't for me at all. After a few minutes, curiosity took over. I pulled out a chair, sat down, and carefully untied the ribbon. My hands were trembling more than I expected. I unfolded the paper slowly, almost nervously, until the box underneath was exposed. It was a small wooden box, worn in some places, like it had been handled many times. The wood was smooth, dark, and warm to the touch. I lifted the lid. Inside was a photo. A single family photo. My family. All of them standing together in front of my parents' house. Snow on the ground. Lights glowing behind them. My brothers and sisters smiling. Their kids holding cups of hot chocolate. My parents standing in the middle, both wearing red scarves they always brought out during the holidays. It was from last Christmas, the one I didn't attend. And there, tucked in the corner of the box, was a small folded piece of paper. I hesitated before picking it up. My heart was beating too fast, like it already knew what was written inside. My fingers felt stiff as I unfolded the paper. The handwriting was familiar, shaky, old, but unmistakable. It was my mother's handwriting. And it said, "We saved you a place. You are always part of us. Come home when you can. Love, Mom." For a moment, I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stared at the letter, reading those lines over and over again. My eyes blurred, and I had to blink hard to see the words clearly. I felt something inside me shift, something I hadn't felt in a very long time. It was gentle and painful at the same time, like a wound being touched and healed in the same moment. I held the note between my fingers, feeling the imprint of her handwriting under my thumb. My mother had always been the heart of our family. She was the one who held everyone together, the one who made every holiday feel warm. She was the reason the house smelled like cinnamon, the reason laughter filled every room. And here she was, reaching out to me without saying a single word out loud. I leaned back in my chair, the letter still in my hand, and closed my eyes. Memories drifted through me like soft shadows. My mother brushing my hair when I was a kid, her humming while she cooked, her stubborn way of insisting I take leftovers home even when I said I didn't need them, her way of always seeing the best in me, even when I didn't see it in myself. I opened my eyes again and looked at the photo. They looked happy, all of them, a real family celebrating a real Christmas. And in the photo, right next to where my mother stood, was an empty space, just wide enough for one more person, for me. I didn't know if they left that space for symbolic reasons or if it was just a coincidence. But I knew my mother. She believed things were never truly broken if people were willing to fix them. That empty space felt like her way of saying, "You still belong." A part of me wanted to pick up the phone right then and there. Call her. Tell her I was sorry. Tell her I missed her. Tell her I wanted to come. But another part of me froze. What if the message wasn't meant for me? What if someone had dropped the box at the wrong door? Or worse, what if my family didn't really want me back, and this was just her trying one last time to pull me closer? Regret has a way of making you doubt even the kindest things. I sat there for a long time, my mind spiraling through every possibility. The sun finally began to rise, casting a soft golden light across the table. It touched the photo gently, like it was trying to warm it. And somehow, that small detail made something inside me soften. I picked up the box again, searching for any clue about who delivered it. There was nothing. No name. No signature. No handwriting except my mother's. Just quiet intention, wrapped in simple paper and left at my door before dawn. Then a thought came to me. A quiet one. A hesitant one. But a real one. Maybe someone else in my family had brought it. Maybe someone had decided that this year, silence wasn't enough. Maybe they were reaching out in their own way. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for me to reach back. I sat there for a long time with the wooden box open in front of me, the photo and the small folded letter resting inside like pieces of a life I had stepped away from but never truly forgotten. The sun was rising slowly, warming the edges of my apartment with a soft golden light. It felt like the day was trying to gently nudge me into feeling something I had kept buried for too long. I reached out and touched the photo again, tracing the edges of the smiles, the outlines of faces I knew by heart but hadn't seen in years. My mother's scarf. My father's proud but tired expression. My siblings laughing at something someone said just before the picture was taken. Even the kids, who had grown up so quickly that I barely recognized them anymore. They were all there, part of a moment I had missed. A moment they still wanted me to be part of. I leaned back in my chair and took a deep breath. I tried to push away the heaviness, but it stayed with me. Regret doesn't leave just because you want it to. It lingers, reminding you of all the moments you didn't show up for. All the times you turned away when you should have stepped forward. Something told me this gift wasn't random. It wasn't something you leave for a stranger or something meant for someone else. It was too personal, too intentional. It felt like someone had gone out of their way to reach me in the only way I couldn't ignore. But there was still the question I couldn't shake. Who delivered it? My mother's note was clear. But the action, the timing, the quiet knock, the early morning delivery, that didn't feel like something she would do alone. My mother was warm, gentle, and thoughtful, but she didn't sneak around at dawn delivering packages. That wasn't her style. She would have called. She would have asked me to visit. She would have sent something in the mail. This was different. It felt like someone younger. Someone who understood the silence between us better than most. Someone who had grown up watching me fade out of family gatherings. Someone who knew that knocking on my door in the middle of the morning might reach me more effectively than any phone call ever could. A name came to mind. My nephew, Ethan. He was the oldest of the grandchildren, the one who used to follow me around when he was little, asking me questions about everything he could think of. Back then, I used to lift him onto my shoulders and tell him stories about things I'd done when I was his age. He used to laugh so hard, he almost fell off. But life had moved fast, and I hadn't seen him in years. The last time we talked, he was maybe 12. Now he would have been what? 20? 21? Old enough to drive. Old enough to make decisions. Old enough to look at a family photo and think, someone is missing. I wasn't sure. I didn't want to assume. But the idea lingered. I stood up and walked to the living room, holding the box carefully in my hands. My apartment felt too quiet again, now that the initial surprise had faded. But the silence had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It held something, possibility maybe, or connection, or maybe just the awareness that something was shifting. I set the box down on the coffee table and sat on the couch. I wasn't ready to call anyone yet. I wasn't ready to show up at my parents' house without knowing if they wanted me there. I didn't want to ruin their holiday by appearing unannounced. I didn't want to create awkwardness or tension, and I definitely didn't want to show up only to find out the gesture wasn't meant for me, or that I had misread something that wasn't meant to be taken so personally. Still, the letter pulsed in my mind. We saved you a place. You are always part of us. Those words felt like a gentle hand reaching out, asking me to take the first step. But taking that step felt heavier than lifting my own weight. I reached for my phone. My thumb hovered over the screen. My contacts list looked unfamiliar now. Names of people I had once spoken to every day now felt distant, like they belonged to a different version of me. I scrolled through until I reached the name I was looking for, Mom. I stared at it, feeling something tighten in my throat. How long had it been since we last talked? Months? maybe longer. I had let the silence stretch so far that calling her now felt like stepping out into a cold wind without a jacket. I didn't call. Not yet. My thumb moved away from her name, and I set the phone down again. Cowardice disguised as caution, or caution disguised as cowardice. Sometimes it's hard to know the difference. Instead, I went back to the kitchen and poured myself another cup of coffee. The warmth in my hands helped steady me a little. I stood by the window again, looking out at the snow-covered street. The world was slowly waking up. A few lights flicked on in nearby apartments. A car drove past, leaving tire tracks on the thin layer of fresh snow. The day had begun, and for the first time in years, Christmas felt like more than just a date on the calendar. I thought about the years I had spent avoiding these feelings, about the phone calls I ignored, about the times my siblings had tried to include me in group chats or send photos of family gatherings. At first, I had replied with short messages, then with nothing at all. Eventually, they stopped expecting answers. And now here I was, standing alone with a box that felt like a doorway to everything I had been running from. I went back to the living room and sat down again. I picked up the photo and studied it closely. My father's smile looked a little weaker than I remembered. My mother's hair was grayer. My siblings had lines on their faces I hadn't seen before. Time had moved on without me, and it showed. Then my eyes fell on something I hadn't noticed earlier, a small detail in the background of the photo. A jacket, a dark winter coat hanging on the porch railing. It looked familiar, too familiar. I had one just like it. I leaned closer. It wasn't identical, but it was close enough that for a moment, it made me wonder, did someone take this photo hoping I would be in it? Did they save me a space not just physically, but in the background of their minds? The thought made my chest tighten. It made something inside me ache in a way I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Then something unexpected happened. My phone buzzed. Just once. A single vibration. I reached for it immediately, more out of instinct than expectation. When I picked it up, I saw a message lighting up the screen. It was from an unknown number. A simple message. Only 4 words. Did you get it? My heart jolted. The timing. The question. The box on my table. It had to be about the package. I stared at the message for a moment, unsure what to say. Part of me wanted to reply immediately. Another part of me hesitated. I typed a simple response. Who is this? I waited. The seconds felt like minutes. Then the reply came. It's Ethan. The breath I had been holding released in a quiet exhale. I sat back against the couch, absorbing those 2 words. The weight of them. The sudden clarity they brought. It was him. He had come. He had stood at my door before dawn. He had knocked softly. He had left the box with my mother's letter inside. And he had waited for me to find it. My hands shook slightly as I typed back. Yes, I got it. 3 little dots appeared on the screen, the typing indicator. Then disappeared. Then appeared again. Like he wasn't sure what to say either. Finally, his message came through. Grandma wanted you to have it. I swallowed hard. My eyes blurred again. I took a deep breath before replying. Thank you. His response came quickly this time. Are you okay? That question hit me harder than I expected. Not because it was complicated, but because no one had asked me that in a long time. I typed slowly, choosing the simplest truth. Trying to be. Another pause. Another message. She misses you. A lot. I closed my eyes. I let the words sit with me. My mother misses you. A lot. The kind of sentence that feels like both a comfort and a wound at the same time. My hands hovered over the phone for a while. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if I deserved to say anything. But eventually, I typed. I miss all of you. He read it. He didn't respond right away. And then finally, then come. Just those 2 words. Simple. Direct. Real. I stared at them for a long time. 2 words that carried the weight of 15 years. 2 words that opened a door I had thought was forever closed. Then a final message came through. Grandma said you don't have to wait for an invitation. And with that, something inside me broke open. Not in a painful way. Not in a dramatic way. But like a wall finally giving way after years of pressure. Like something inside me whispering, maybe it's time to go home. I remember sitting alone in that small apartment, listening to the faint hum of the heater as it clicked on and off. It was one of those winter evenings when the cold settles into the walls, and even a warm room feels a little empty. I sat there with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, staring at the same corner of the living room like it might eventually talk back to me. I kept replaying that moment when my brother told me, you know, you could try harder with the family. His words stayed with me like a quiet echo that refused to fade. It wasn't anger I felt. It was confusion, mixed with something heavier. Something like shame. Because part of me wondered if he was right. Part of me wondered if maybe I had let the distance grow. I tapped my fingers on the table, thinking about all the years that had stretched between us. Years filled with silence, assumptions, misunderstandings that never got sorted out. I had always thought it was their job to reach out to me. But maybe I had forgotten that phones worked both ways. Still, a part of me also felt that a family should want you around. They should make room for you. Even if you're quiet. Even if you keep to yourself. Even if you show up with your own flaws. I swallowed hard, feeling that familiar tightness in my throat. It was the same feeling I got every holiday season. That ache that showed up right around Thanksgiving and stayed long after Christmas lights were taken down around the neighborhood. I took a slow breath and whispered, maybe next year. I said that same sentence every year. And every year, nothing changed. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain slightly open. Outside, the neighborhood was covered in a thin layer of frost, the kind that makes everything look cleaner than it actually is. A couple walked past wearing matching red scarves, holding hands as they laughed at something one of them said. Even at that distance, I could feel the warmth they shared. Something about that moment made me think of my childhood. Not all of it was bad. That's the thing people forget when they talk about distant families. There were good moments. Not perfect, not overflowing with affection, but warm enough to remember. Like the time my dad spent the whole afternoon teaching me how to ride a bike. Or the nights my mom stayed up with me when I had trouble sleeping, humming gently so I would relax. Or my sister drawing little shapes on my notebooks because she said the pages looked too boring. There were good pieces scattered through the years. But as we got older, the gaps between those moments grew wider. It wasn't one big fight or one dramatic event that separated us. It was a long chain of tiny misunderstandings, quiet disappointments, missed calls, and unspoken feelings. The kind of things that don't seem dangerous on their own, until one day you look around and realize you're standing on the opposite side of a canyon you didn't know you were helping create. I sat back down and rubbed my temples. Why does it bother me so much? I whispered out loud. I didn't have an answer, but I knew it bothered me every single year. I picked up my phone and opened the family group chat. Messages from weeks ago sat there. Pictures of birthday cakes, updates about work, someone sharing a photo of their dog in a little holiday sweater. All moments I wasn't part of. My finger hovered over the keyboard for a long time. Just one message. Hey, how's everyone doing? Could have started something. Maybe a conversation. Maybe a small connection. But instead, I sighed and set the phone back down. That was always the problem. Reaching out felt like I was interrupting something. Like the family ship had sailed, and I was just waving from the dock, hoping someone might look back. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. The silence in my apartment felt heavier than usual. Not painful, just heavy, like a blanket made of memories and things left unsaid. I closed my eyes and listened to the heater hum again. That sound became my companion during winter. It was strange how quiet appliances could feel more familiar than people sometimes. I thought about my brother's words again. You could try harder. Maybe he didn't say it to hurt me. Maybe he meant it as a push, a gentle nudge that I wasn't ready to take. But what stuck with me wasn't the advice. It was the realization that he had no idea how hard it already felt. Trying wasn't as simple as sending a message or showing up at a dinner. Trying meant pushing through years of feeling like the outsider. Trying meant stepping into rooms where I wasn't sure I was wanted. Trying meant risking silence, rejection, or those awkward glances that say, "Oh, you came." I wasn't afraid of people. I was afraid of that feeling. I grabbed my jacket from the chair and put it on. I needed air. The cold outside was sharp, the kind that hits your face and wakes you up whether you want it to or not. I pulled the zipper up to my neck and stuffed my hands into my pockets. The sky above was a deep, quiet gray, the type of winter sky that made the world feel softer. As I walked down the street, I could see lights turning on in different houses, warm yellow glows that spilled through curtains. Families gathering, people sitting down to dinner, laughter drifting through thin walls and open windows. I wondered what that felt like, not in a general sense, but in a real, everyday way. I wondered what it felt like to walk into a home where you knew someone was waiting for you, where your presence wasn't a question mark, but something natural, something expected. As I walked, I found myself thinking about the last time I had been invited to a family event. It had been years. I don't even remember what holiday it was. I just remember sitting at the table, feeling like I was watching the family instead of being part of it. Watching them laugh, joke, tell stories I wasn't included in. I remember smiling politely, nodding when someone looked my way, trying to blend in so no one would notice how out of place I felt. That was the last time I went. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't want to feel that again. As I walked further, my breath puffed out in soft white clouds. I stopped near a small park. The swings creaked in the wind, and the ground was covered in a thin layer of frost. I sat down on a bench and let out a long breath. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, I whispered. Even saying it out loud didn't make it clearer. I looked at the empty swings. They reminded me of a simpler time. A time when relationships weren't complicated yet, when everything could be fixed with a quick apology or a shared snack. But adulthood didn't work like that. People grew in different directions. Families split, not always by choice, but by nature, by time, by personal struggles no one talks about. I leaned forward, my elbows resting on my knees, my hands clasped together. For the first time in a long while, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, the distance between us wasn't only their fault or mine. Maybe it was both. Maybe it was something we all contributed to, without meaning to, without realizing what it would eventually cost. I stayed there for a while, letting those thoughts sink in. Eventually, I stood and headed back home. The sky had darkened, and the streetlights flickered one by one. When I got inside, I turned on a small lamp. The warm light made the room feel a little less empty. I took off my jacket and hung it on the back of the chair again. My phone buzzed. One notification. I walked over and picked it up. It was a message from my brother. He said, "Hey, I know I said a lot earlier. I just wanted to check on you. Hope you're okay." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Something softened in my chest. Something small, but real. I typed back slowly. "Yeah, I'm okay. Thanks for checking." I paused. Then, for the first time in a long time, I added, "How are you?" It wasn't much. Just 3 small words. But it felt bigger than anything I had said to him in years. When he replied, a long message about work, about his kids, about things happening in his life, I felt something shift. Not a miracle. Not a sudden reunion. Just a small opening. A crack in the wall that had stood between us for so long. I read his message twice. And for the first time in a while, I didn't feel like an outsider. Not fully a part of the family yet, but not completely invisible either. It was small, subtle, quiet, but it was something. And sometimes, something is the start of everything. That night, after my brother and I exchanged those messages, something inside me felt lighter. Not fixed, not healed, just lighter, the way you feel when you loosen a knot that has been tight for years, even if the whole rope is still tangled. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone still in my hand, the glow of the screen fading as the conversation ended. I couldn't remember the last time we talked like that. Maybe we never had, not in our adult years. We used to talk all the time when we were kids. We used to share a room, whispering across the dark when we were supposed to be asleep. He'd tell me about some video game he wanted, and I'd talk about how afraid I was of thunderstorms. Somewhere along the road, we stopped telling each other the small things. And when the small things go quiet, the big things follow. I lay down and stared at the ceiling. The room was dim, only a soft sliver of streetlight coming through the blinds. I remembered how my brother used to throw pillows at me when I snored. How we'd fight over who got the top bunk. How we'd complain about chores like the world was ending. Funny how childhood feels so close when you think about it, even when the years between then and now are filled with silence. Sometimes memories stay warmer than real life. I turned on my side and exhaled slowly. "Maybe this is the start," I whispered. I didn't know what I meant by that. I just knew something felt different. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. I wasn't sure why. Maybe my mind didn't want to let go of the feeling from the night before. Maybe it was hope, though I didn't want to call it that yet. Hope felt too big for what I was feeling. I made coffee and sat by the window. The world outside was still dark, except for a faint glow on the horizon. The city was quiet, like it was holding its breath. I wrapped both hands around the warm mug and let the steam rise against my face. My phone buzzed again. It was my sister this time. She sent me a short message. "Morning. Heard you talked to Mark yesterday. How are you doing?" I smiled without meaning to. My sister wasn't the type to send messages early in the morning. She wasn't the type to reach out much at all. She was the quiet one, quiet in a way that made my own quietness look loud. I replied, "I'm okay. Just thinking." She sent back a little typing indicator, those 3 dots that blink like someone trying to gather the right words. 2 minutes passed, then the message came. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. I stared at that line. Simple. Soft. Unlike her usual tone. I didn't know what to say, so I told the truth. Thank you. I mean that. She didn't respond again. But she didn't need to. Her message was enough. I sat there for a long time, holding the phone loosely in my hand. I felt noticed. And that alone was a strange, unfamiliar warmth. The day moved slowly. I cleaned the apartment a little, washed a few dishes, threw out some old letters I didn't need anymore. All the while, I found myself drifting back to the past, not in a painful way, but in that quiet, reflective way where you don't judge anything. You just look at your life like a long hallway filled with moments both bright and dim. I remembered one Christmas morning when I was maybe 10 years old. My mom had baked cinnamon rolls, and the whole house smelled warm. My dad pretended he didn't know which gift was mine, even though he labeled them himself. My sister was running around with her new doll, and my brother kept hitting me in the arm because he was excited about his new remote control car. That day felt simple. It felt like home. But the older we got, the smaller the moments of closeness became. Arguments turned into distance. Disagreements turned into silence. Schedules turned into excuses. And before any of us realized what happened, holidays became something I watched from afar. I'd see pictures of the whole family standing together. My parents, my brother, my sister, their partners, the kids, and I would be outside the frame. Not erased, just absent, as if the picture had never needed a space for me. In the early afternoon, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. The air was cold, but not harsh, the kind of winter cold that taps your cheeks instead of stinging them. I walked without a destination, letting my feet choose the direction. As I passed the bakery on the corner, the smell of fresh bread drifted out, carrying memories with it. My mom used to bring home warm bread on weekends. She'd cut it while it was still soft, and the steam would rise in little curls. We'd sit around the table, all of us, even my dad who usually stayed quiet after long work weeks. Those mornings felt safe. I wondered if my family remembered them too, or if those memories had faded for everyone else. I kept walking until I reached the library. It wasn't open yet, but I stood by the steps, looking at the tall windows and the reflection of the gray sky in the glass. Sometimes I wished life came with chapters like books. Clear beginnings. Clear endings. A place where you could stop, turn a page, and start again. But real life doesn't work like that. It just moves forward, carrying everything with it unless you choose to set something down. I sat on the steps and pulled my jacket tighter around me. My breath made soft clouds in the air. I tried to think about the future, something I normally avoided. The idea of change always felt overwhelming. Not because I didn't want it, but because I wasn't sure how to handle it if it actually came. What if I tried reconnecting, and it didn't work? What if I reached out, and nothing changed? What if I opened up, and still felt alone? Those thoughts sat heavy in my chest. I didn't want to be disappointed again. I didn't want to hope for something and watch it fall apart. But then I remembered my brother's message from last night, and my sister's message this morning. Small things, yes, but they were real, and real things matter. On my way back home, I stopped by a small store and picked up a few groceries, bread, soup, some fruit. It wasn't much, but it felt grounding to carry something warm in my hands. When I got home, I made a bowl of soup and sat quietly at the table. As I ate, I thought about Christmas. It was only a few days away. Normally, I tried to ignore it, pushing the date out of my mind as much as I could. But this year felt different. Not because I had been invited. I hadn't. Not yet. But because, for the first time in a long time, the door didn't feel completely closed. Maybe it was open just a crack, but even a crack lets in a little light. That evening, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I took out a pen and a notebook, and I wrote a letter. Not a long one. Not anything dramatic or emotional. Just a simple message addressed to my mom and dad. I wrote, "I hope you're both doing well. I've been thinking about you. I miss the old holidays. I'm not sure if things can be like that again, but I wanted to say hello." I read it twice. My handwriting looked shaky, like the words weren't sure they belonged on the page. But the message felt honest. And honesty, I realized, was something we all lacked for years. I didn't mail the letter. Not yet. I kept it on the table, just sitting there like a small promise to myself. The next morning, I woke up to a new message on my phone. It was from my mom. Just 3 words. "Call me when you can." I froze. I stared at the screen, heart beating slower and louder at the same time. We hadn't spoken voice to voice in years. Maybe longer than I wanted to admit. I sat down on the couch, phone still in my hand, my thumb hovering above the call button. I didn't know what she wanted to say. I didn't know what I was supposed to say. I didn't know if this call would make things better or bring up all the things we had avoided for so long. But I took a breath. A long, steady breath. And I pressed call. The phone rang once. Twice. 3 times. Then her voice came through. Soft. Hesitant. Familiar. Hi, it's Mom. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I felt something inside me break open. Not in a painful way, but in a way that felt like the beginning of something I didn't have a name for yet. When I heard my mom's voice on the phone, something inside me shifted in a way I wasn't prepared for. It had been years, real years, since I had heard that softness, that familiar breath at the end of each word, that quiet warmth she always tried to carry even when she wasn't sure how. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Not because I didn't want to, but because my throat tightened, like the words were trying to climb past years of silence and didn't know how anymore. She must have sensed it, because she said, very gently, "It's okay, take your time." Those 4 words brought back a flood of memories. All the nights she sat with me when I was little. The times I was sick and she put a cool cloth on my forehead. The morning she walked with me to school because I was too nervous to go alone after a bad week. Even though we hadn't talked much as adults, hearing her voice still felt like stepping into a familiar room I hadn't visited in years. A room with its lights dimmed, but still warm. I swallowed hard and finally said, "Hi, Mom." There was a small, shaky breath from her side. That breath alone told me she'd been waiting for this moment too. "I'm glad you called," she said. Her voice wasn't perfect. It wavered a little, like she was choosing her words as carefully as I was choosing mine. "I'm glad you asked me to," I replied. There was a pause. Not uncomfortable, just weighted with all the things we hadn't said in so long. She finally asked, "How have you been?" A simple question. One people ask every day without thinking. But coming from her, it felt different. It felt like a question she truly wanted to know the answer to. A question she hadn't asked in years, maybe because she didn't know if she was allowed to. "I've been okay," I said softly. "Some days better than others. Some days quiet. You know how I am." She let out a small laugh. "Yeah, you've always been the quiet one." Something about hearing her say that, in that warm way mothers say things. It softened me a little more, like a part of me that had been clenched for years finally loosened. "What about you?" I asked. "How are you and Dad?" She hesitated. Not long, but long enough to tell me something wasn't entirely right. "We're okay," she said. "Your dad's been well. He's been trying to take it easy. The doctor said he needs to rest more." I sat up straighter. "What's wrong?" "Oh, nothing serious," she answered quickly. "Just a bit too quickly. That's not why I called. We'll talk about that later." But I knew her tone. I knew when she was hiding something to keep from worrying us. She'd done it our whole lives. Still, I didn't push. Not yet. Another pause. Not cold. Just heavy. Then she said softly, "Your brother told me you two talked." "Yeah," I said. "We did. I'm glad." Her voice warmed, just a little. Enough to let me know she meant it. "It would be nice," she continued gently, "if the whole family talked again." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I'd like that," I said. She breathed out. The kind of breath someone releases when they've been holding on to something for a long time. "You know," she said after a moment, "we never wanted you to feel left out." Something inside me froze. Those words, the ones I had needed for so many years, came with a sudden quiet ache. "I did," I whispered. "I know," she answered. "I think we all knew." I felt that ache rise in my chest, like something old and unspoken was finally being touched. We didn't know how to reach you sometimes," she said. "You were always so independent. You always said you were fine. You always said you didn't want to fuss." "That doesn't mean I didn't want to be included," I said, my voice barely above a breath. "I know," she whispered. "We made mistakes. All of us. And I'm sorry if you felt alone. Truly." I closed my eyes. I hadn't expected an apology. Not from her. Not after all this time. She wasn't crying, but I could hear something soft in her words, something almost fragile. "I wasn't perfect either," I said, swallowing hard. I pulled away too, more than I probably should have. "That's life," she said quietly. "We all pull away at different times." There was a small silence between us. Not the kind that hurts, but the kind that holds room for understanding. Then she said, with that warm, hopeful tone only a mother has, "Christmas is coming. You don't have to say yes or no right now, but we'd love to see you if you want to come." Those words sat on me like a soft weight. Warm, unexpected, scary somehow. I didn't answer right away. I just breathed, feeling my heart beat slow and steady in my chest. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "I really will." "That's all I ask," she replied. We talked for a little while longer. Nothing deep, nothing heavy. She told me the kids had grown so fast. She mentioned that my sister had been asking about me more lately. She said the house was almost ready for Christmas, though Dad had insisted he could still hang the lights even though he shouldn't be climbing anything, as she put it. I found myself smiling through most of it. It was the first real conversation we'd had in years. When I finally hung up, the room felt different. Lighter, wider, like the walls were finally letting in some air. I sat there for a long time, phone still in my hand, staring at nothing in particular. Something inside me felt open, not fully healed, not fully brave, but open enough to let something new in. That afternoon, I went for another walk. The cold felt less sharp, somehow. The sky looked a little brighter. Maybe it was just me. Maybe it was the weight that had lifted, even if only a little. As I passed by a family decorating the front yard with lights, the little girl holding tinsel turned and waved at me. Her gloves were too big for her tiny hands. I waved back, and her smile warmed something in me. The world suddenly looked a little softer, a little more welcoming. When I got home, I read the letter I had written the night before, the one I hadn't mailed yet. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I needed it anymore. Not because the words weren't true, but because we had finally said some of them out loud. Still, I kept the letter. I folded it gently and placed it in a drawer. Not as a message I still needed to send, but as a reminder of the moment when everything began to shift. That night, just before I went to bed, my phone buzzed again. A message from my sister. She wrote, "Mom said she talked to you. I'm glad. I miss you." 3 words I never expected from her. 3 words that hit me harder than I thought they would. I typed back, "I miss you too." Then I set my phone down, turned off the light, and lay there in the dark. For the first time in a very long time, sleep came easily, and somewhere deep inside me, almost hidden, was a feeling I had forgotten how to feel. The beginning of peace. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm again. There was something different about the air in the room. It wasn't warmer, but it felt lighter, like the heaviness I had gotten used to carrying around had thinned out during the night. I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes. For a brief moment, I almost forgot about the conversation I'd had with my mom the day before. But as soon as the memory returned, I felt that same mix of warmth and uncertainty settle in my chest. It was strange how a single conversation could change the way a room felt, the way a person felt, the way the world looked when you stepped outside. I got up, made some coffee, and stood by the window while the sky shifted from a deep blue to a soft gray. I watched the world wake up, a neighbor scraping frost off his windshield, a woman walking her dog in a thick winter coat, a kid wearing a backpack that looked too big for his small shoulders. Life went on like always, but something inside me wasn't the same. I thought about my mom's voice. I thought about the way she paused before saying certain things, as though she was stepping carefully through years of silence. I thought about how she had said, "We'd love to see you." And I thought about how I hadn't felt dismissed, not even once during the call. That alone was unusual, comforting, and confusing. I took a deep breath and sat down with my coffee. Christmas. Just thinking the word made something twist inside me. For so many years, I'd trained myself to treat it like any other day. A day to work if I could. A day to sleep in. A day to pretend didn't exist. But this year, the idea kept circling back. My brother reaching out. My sister sending a message. My mom asking me to call. My dad, though quiet, still there in the background of that conversation, like an old familiar shadow I hadn't stepped into in a long time. I wasn't used to this kind of closeness anymore. It felt good, but it also scared me. There was a soft knock on my own thoughts, that quiet voice inside that whispered, "What if you go and nothing has changed? What if you go and you still feel like the outsider? What if you go and it hurts again?" I closed my eyes. Fear has a way of sounding reasonable, even when it's not. Later in the morning, I pulled out a small box of old photographs I kept tucked away in a closet. I didn't know why I grabbed it. Maybe curiosity. Maybe nostalgia. Maybe I wanted to see if the memories still felt real. The box was dusty, the kind of dust that collects only when someone hasn't touched something for a long time. I sat on the floor, legs crossed, and opened the lid. The smell of old paper rose into the air, familiar, faded, and strangely comforting. The first picture I pulled out was from a family picnic. My brother had mustard on his shirt. My sister was trying to hide behind my mom. And I was standing off to the side, hands in my pockets, not quite smiling, but not unhappy either. I stared at that version of myself. A kid who didn't know he'd grow up feeling like a distant planet. A kid who just wanted to belong without having to say it. I placed the photo gently beside me and pulled out another. This one was Christmas. We were all gathered around the tree. My dad looked tired but happy. My mom had her hair tied back, her glasses slightly crooked like they always were when she rushed around the house. My sister held a sparkly bracelet she clearly loved. My brother was opening a box of action figures with wide eyes. And me? I was sitting cross-legged on the floor, holding a book. The corner of my mouth turned upward in a tiny smile. One of the few times someone caught me looking happy on camera. I touched the edge of that photo gently with my thumb. It meant more than I expected it to. I kept going through the pictures, one by one. Each one brought back a memory, some bright, some blurry, some bittersweet. But none of them felt like something I wanted to run from. And maybe that was the sign I needed. Around noon, my phone buzzed. Another message, this time from my dad. It was short, just like he always was with texting. Mom said you called. Good to hear. Hope you're doing well. No fancy words. No big emotions. Just him, in the simplest form. But seeing his name pop up, that hit me harder than I expected. I typed back. Thanks. I'm okay. Hope you're doing all right too. He responded with a thumbs up emoji. I actually laughed when I saw it. He wasn't an emoji person. He probably had no idea what half of them meant. Still, it was something. A small bridge. A quiet gesture. The rest of the day passed slowly. I cleaned a little more, made a simple lunch, and stepped outside to get some fresh air. The cold felt sharper than the day before, but it didn't bother me as much. As I walked down the street, I saw a small group of kids building a snowman. Their gloves were mismatched, and their cheeks were red from the chill, but they looked completely absorbed in what they were doing. When the smallest one's hat fell off, the others rushed to put it back on, all talking at once, all laughing like the world existed only for them in that moment. It made me think about my own childhood again. Not the lonely parts, not the confusing parts, but the moments when things felt simple, when family was just family. When I got home, I made myself a warm drink, sat on the couch, and stared at the Christmas lights glowing faintly from the apartment across the courtyard. And for the first time in years, I whispered the question out loud. Should I go? The room stayed quiet, but inside me, something answered. Not a certainty, not a clear yes, but a feeling, a small, steady pull. A pull toward something familiar, something unfinished, something that might finally change if I let it. I closed my eyes and let that feeling stay. I wasn't ready to decide yet, but I was closer than I had ever been. And that alone felt like the beginning of something I had been waiting for without even knowing it. The next morning, I woke up to the faint glow of sunlight filtering through the blinds. The world outside was still soft, muffled by the frost that had settled overnight. I lay in bed for a while, listening to the quiet hum of my apartment. Somehow, that quiet didn't feel oppressive anymore. It felt expectant, like the house was waiting with me, not against me. I remembered the conversation with my mom, the messages from my siblings, the quiet acknowledgement from my dad. Something in me had shifted. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough that I could feel the tug of possibility. That possibility had a name. Christmas. The thought of walking into my parents' house for the first time in years made my chest tighten. I wasn't nervous about the people themselves. I had missed them too much for fear to hold. No, it was the weight of time. All the years I had been absent. The laughter I hadn't shared. The conversations I hadn't had. The milestones I had missed. Could one Christmas morning erase all of that? No, of course not. But maybe it could start to bridge the gap. Maybe it could open a door I had left closed for far too long. I got up and made a pot of coffee, letting the aroma fill the small apartment. It was grounding. A simple ritual, something I could control, something steady in a world that had often felt uncertain. I sat by the window and watched as a neighbor across the street shoveled snow from his driveway. He waved at me as he passed, and I waved back automatically, a small smile on my face. I realized I hadn't smiled like that in a long time. Not genuinely, not for no reason. After coffee, I made a list. A mental list of things I needed to do if I decided to go home. Pack clothes for a few days. Bring a small gift for the kids. Something simple. Maybe chocolate or a board game. Decide how to face my parents without letting my guard up completely. Think about what I wanted to say, what I needed to say. It was a small, practical checklist, but it helped me feel less adrift. I spent the rest of the day doing errands and preparing. At one point, I paused in the grocery store, staring at the rows of decorations and seasonal treats. It struck me how the world seemed to move forward even when I had been standing still for so long. Families shopped together. Children laughed in the aisles. Couples argued lightly over which ornament looked best. And all of it reminded me of what I had been missing, what I had run from. I bought a small box of chocolates and a simple puzzle for the kids. Something to show them I remembered them, even if I hadn't been around for years. The cashier, a young woman with a warm smile, asked if the items were for a family gathering. I hesitated and then nodded. Yeah, I said softly. Family. The word felt strange and heavy on my tongue, but also comforting. When I got home, I packed my bag slowly, carefully. Each piece of clothing felt like a small promise. A promise that I was going, that I was trying, that I was willing to step into a world I had avoided for too long. I packed an extra scarf, remembering my mother's habit of saying, "Don't catch a cold," even when I thought I was invincible. Finally, I set the bag by the door. I stood there for a long time, staring at it, as if it were a bridge to another life. And in a quiet whisper, I told myself, "You're doing the right thing." The drive to my parents' house was slow, deliberate. I didn't rush. The streets were quiet, the snow crunching gently under the tires. My mind replayed everything I might say. I didn't want to stumble over words. I didn't want to be awkward. I didn't want to ruin the moment before it even began. But as I drove, I realized something important. It wasn't about perfection. It was about presence. Showing up. Being there. Even if the words weren't perfect. When I finally turned onto the familiar street, my heart beat faster than I expected. The house came into view, the lights strung along the roofline glowing softly in the winter dusk. The windows were warm with yellow light, the kind that spills out like an invitation. I parked the car and sat for a moment, the engine idling, my hands resting on the steering wheel. I thought about the last time I had been here. I remembered my mother at the door, my father standing back, my siblings laughing and playing with the kids. I remembered feeling invisible, and I realized that fear still lingered in the edges of my chest. I took a deep breath. I picked up my bag, opened the door, and stepped out into the cold. The walk to the front door felt like it stretched on forever. Each step was a mix of anticipation and anxiety. I reached the porch and paused. My hand hovered over the doorbell. I thought about turning back, but then I thought about the messages, the letters, the phone calls, the moments I had let slip away. I rang the bell. The sound echoed lightly in the still evening air. Then I heard footsteps. The door opened, and there she was, my mother. Her eyes widened slightly, and then softened. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked at me, and for the first time in years, I felt seen. I wasn't sure. I started. My voice caught slightly. I wasn't sure if I should come. She stepped aside and held the door open. "You're here," she said simply. "That's all that matters." The warmth of the house enveloped me as I stepped inside. The smell of cinnamon and pine, the glow of the lights, the faint sound of Christmas music, it all hit me at once. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes. And then I heard it. "Uncle." My nephew ran across the living room and threw his arms around me before I could even react. His hug was tight, earnest, and full of the kind of joy only children can give without hesitation. I hugged him back. "Hey, buddy," I whispered. "I've missed you." "I missed you too," he said, stepping back with a grin. And just like that, the tension that had been coiled inside me for years started to unravel. My father appeared in the doorway, a small, tentative smile on his face. "Welcome home," he said simply. I nodded, voice thick. "It's good to be here." My sister came next, followed by the kids. She hugged me tightly, the kind of hug that said everything words couldn't. "Finally," she whispered. And then I saw my mother, standing there with her hands lightly clasped in front of her. "I'm so glad you came," she said, her voice trembling a little. I looked around the room. Everyone was smiling. Everyone was warm. Everyone was waiting for me in ways I hadn't dared to imagine. I realized in that moment that the distance I had felt for so long had been real. But so had the love that remained, quiet and patient, waiting for me to step forward. Christmas morning had only just begun, and yet, I felt it, the beginning of a new chapter, one where I was no longer absent, one where I could be present, imperfectly, but fully. We spent the morning opening presents, laughing at small jokes, sipping hot chocolate, and simply being together. I noticed things I hadn't noticed before. The way my father's hand trembled slightly when he poured coffee, the way my mother hummed softly while straightening the tablecloth, the way my siblings moved around the room like they had all been rehearsing a scene they wanted me to feel a part of. And when the kids finally tore into their gifts, I sat back and watched them, feeling a quiet satisfaction. The chocolate and the puzzle I had brought were a hit, but the smiles and the laughter, the real joy, were something I couldn't have bought or planned. I could only witness them. I found myself laughing more than I had in years. Not the forced laughs of someone trying to fit in, but real, deep laughter that came from being somewhere I belonged. Later, as we gathered around the table for Christmas dinner, my mom reached out and lightly touched my hand. "We saved you a seat," she said softly. I smiled, swallowing hard. "Thank you," I said, voice quiet but steady. And in that moment, I realized something important. It wasn't about undoing the years of absence. It wasn't about pretending the past didn't exist. It wasn't even about perfect reconciliation. It was about showing up, being present, taking the first step towards something real. Because sometimes, that's all it takes. The days that followed Christmas felt different. Not dramatic. Not like the world had suddenly flipped upside down. Just different. I woke up on the morning after Christmas, and the house was quiet. The kids were still asleep, exhausted from yesterday's excitement. My parents were downstairs, and I could hear the faint sound of the coffee maker humming. My sister's bedroom door was closed, but I imagined she was probably already on her laptop, checking messages or scrolling quietly. I lay in bed a little longer than usual, listening to the soft, domestic sounds that had become almost foreign to me over the years. And in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't used to this, to being included, to being part of the rhythm of family life again. But it felt good. I got up, made myself a cup of coffee, and wandered into the kitchen. My father was pouring his own cup and glanced at me, a small smile on his face. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I replied. No awkwardness. No forced words. Just presence. We drank in silence for a while, and I thought about how much I had missed these ordinary, quiet moments. The way life moves on quietly in the background. The way families exist in the spaces between laughter and chores and shared meals. Later that morning, my mom suggested we take a short walk. She bundled me up in my scarf, and we stepped outside into the crisp winter air. Snow was still scattered along the sidewalks, and the sunlight glinted off icy patches. It wasn't a grand gesture, just a walk down the street to the small park nearby, but it felt monumental to me. We walked slowly, side by side. My mom said little at first, and I said even less. But that silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt easy, like we were rediscovering a rhythm we had forgotten we once had. "You've grown a lot," she said after a while, her voice soft. "Not just in years, but you've changed." I nodded, unsure what to say. "I've tried," I admitted. "To be better, I guess. To not disappear so much." She smiled gently. "We all try, and we all fail sometimes. But showing up is what matters." Her words stayed with me. I thought about all the years I had avoided family gatherings, all the holidays I had skipped, all the distance I had let grow. And I realized I hadn't truly disappeared. Not completely. Not as long as love lingered in the background, waiting. That afternoon, we returned home. The rest of the family was back in the living room, sipping hot chocolate and laughing at stories from the day before. My sister nudged me gently, and I joined in. It felt natural, almost like slipping into an old coat that still fit perfectly. I watched the kids play with the puzzle I had brought, and I felt a quiet swell of happiness. Not the loud, cinematic kind of happiness that movies show, but something quieter, steadier. Something that felt like roots growing quietly in the soil, strong and slow. Later, as the day turned into evening, I found myself alone in the living room for a few moments. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, and the room smelled faintly of pine and cinnamon. I thought about all the years I had spent feeling like an outsider. I thought about the small, accumulating moments that had kept me away, misunderstandings, assumptions, fear, pride, and the simple inertia of routine. And I realized something that surprised me. All of that time, I had carried both regret and hope, even if I didn't always name them as such. Regret for the years I had lost. Hope that someday, somehow, the doors might open again. The doors had opened, and now it was up to me to step fully through them. That night, after the family had gone to bed, I sat by the window again. The lights outside glimmered softly, and the world felt calm. I held my cup of tea in my hands and thought about everything that had happened over the last few days. I thought about my mother's voice, my father's simple, understated gestures, my sister's careful words, my brother's initial messages that had sparked this change. And most of all, I thought about the quiet joy of watching my nieces and nephews smile without a care, of feeling their acceptance without conditions. It struck me that this was what family was meant to be. Not perfect, not always easy, not even always fair, but real, present, loving in the quietest, most patient ways. I realized, too, that I didn't have to carry all the past with me like a weight. I could acknowledge it, learn from it, maybe even apologize for it when necessary, but I didn't have to let it define the future. I thought about my own choices, the times I had stayed away, the walls I had built. And I understood something deeply. Love sometimes waits. It doesn't always vanish just because distance grows. Sometimes, it simply waits for courage to show up. And courage, I decided, was something I wanted to nurture. Not in a dramatic, heroic way. Not in a way that required grand gestures. But in the small, consistent ways that matter most. Showing up, listening, offering help, asking questions, caring without expectation. I felt a quiet gratitude in that moment. Gratitude for the family who had waited. Gratitude for the chance to start again. Gratitude for the realization that the heart is resilient, that connections can be rebuilt even after years of absence, and that forgiveness, of others and of myself, was possible. The snow fell gently outside, dusting the world in white. I closed my eyes, letting the quiet fill me. I didn't have all the answers, and I didn't need them yet. I only had this moment, and it was enough. The fire crackled softly. The house breathed with life. And somewhere deep inside me, a small, steady warmth began to grow. The warmth of being home. The warmth of being seen. The warmth of belonging again. I realized then, quietly, without drama, sometimes it only takes one Christmas morning. One simple decision to reach out. One small act of courage to change everything. I leaned back in my chair and let myself smile. Not a forced smile. Not a cautious one, but the kind that comes from deep inside. The kind that carries hope without asking for guarantees. The kind that tells you the future is possible. And in that quiet, soft moment, I understood something I had almost forgotten. Family isn't about never leaving. It's not about never hurting each other. It's not about perfect timing or flawless memories. Family is about coming back. It's about opening your heart when you've been afraid. It's about choosing each other, even after years of absence, even after silence, even after fear. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready. The days after Christmas passed with a quiet, gentle rhythm I hadn't experienced in years. I didn't rush to talk about the past, and neither did my family. There was no need. We were simply together, present in the same space, and that alone was enough. We shared meals, told stories, and laughed more than I thought possible. I noticed the small things I had missed before. The way my father tilted his head when he listened intently, the way my mother's eyes softened when she smiled, the little gestures my siblings made without even thinking. Each one reminded me that family isn't always about grand declarations. It's in the quiet moments, the small acts of care that pile up over time. One afternoon, I found myself sitting by the window with my nephew on my lap, helping him color in a Christmas card for my mom. His little hands were smudged with crayons, and he laughed every time he made a new mistake. "Uncle," he said, looking up at me, "I'm glad you came this year." I felt a lump in my throat. "Me too, buddy. Me too." I realized then that love doesn't always need to be spoken to exist. It's in being there, in showing up, in choosing presence over absence. Later, my sister and I sat on the couch while the kids napped. She looked at me, her eyes soft but serious. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. The words felt heavy in the best way possible. Not because I needed validation, but because they reminded me that the past didn't have to define the present. That even after years of distance, bridges could be rebuilt. That evening, I went for a short walk alone, letting the crisp winter air fill my lungs. I thought about the letter I had written weeks before, the one I hadn't sent. I realized I didn't need to. The words had found their way into reality through my presence, my willingness to reach out, my courage to step back into the family I had left behind. I thought about the long, quiet nights I had spent feeling lonely, the holidays I had avoided, the invitations I had declined out of fear or pride. And I realized something deeply important. Every day I had spent away had brought me here. Every mistake, every missed moment, every quiet regret had taught me the value of showing up, the importance of connection, and the weight of absence. When I returned inside, the house was quiet. My family was preparing for a small dinner, the kids were drawing, my parents were moving quietly in the kitchen. I stood in the doorway for a moment and let myself absorb it all. This was home. Not perfect, not always easy, but real, present, alive. That night, as I lay in bed in the guest room my parents had prepared for me, I thought about the lessons I had learned over the past few weeks. Fear can hold you back, but courage doesn't have to be loud. It can be small and quiet, just enough to open the door. Silence can feel like distance, but love can wait patiently for your return. Family isn't about never leaving. It's about coming back. It's about choosing each other, even when the past has hurt. The smallest gestures, a call, a message, a presence, can change everything. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of completion. Not closure, exactly. Life doesn't give neat endings. But something had shifted inside me. Something had settled. I thought about the future, not with fear, but with quiet hope. I knew there would still be misunderstandings, awkward moments, and days when distance might creep in again. But I also knew that the bridge had been rebuilt, and that bridge could hold. Christmas morning had been more than a day. It had been a beginning, a chance to start again, to be seen, to belong. And as I drifted to sleep that night, I understood finally that sometimes the hardest steps lead to the most meaningful places. Home isn't always a place. Home is where the heart finds its courage. Home is where love waits, patiently, for us to return. Home is the choice to show up, even after years of absence. And I had chosen to come home.